The bathroom door slammed open so hard it rattled the mirror, steam pouring out, the shower still running, my whole world collapsing into chaos in the span of a single heartbeat. You ever have one of those moments where your life gets split in two, the before and after, and you can feel it happening in real time? Yeah, that was me, standing there dripping wet, towel clenched in one hand, while Claudia Mercer, queen of our HOA, marched into my hallway like she owned the place. No warning, no apology, just random inspection. Daniel. With that smirk she wore like a badge of honor. I'll be honest, I've never been angrier or more humiliated in my own home. My wife screamed, voice raw and terrified, and Claudia didn't even blink. If anything, she enjoyed it, her little entourage of board members trailing behind, silent as shadows. I remember thinking, she really thinks she can get away with this, doesn't she? But what she didn't know was that my wife, God bless her, had been through worse than any HOA president, and she had the kind of resolve that scares the hell out of bullies. With shaking hands, she ripped back the shower curtain and flashed a badge, that unmistakable flash of authority, FBI. The letters caught the light, and the room just froze. You want to talk about a power shift? That was the sound of Claudia's little kingdom cracking. She tried to play it cool. This is an HOA matter, federal badge or not. We have jurisdiction. But her voice had lost its bite, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. You know what's wild? All those rules and fines she loved to wave around, they didn't mean a damn thing in that moment. What mattered was my wife's dignity, and the fact that the bathroom Claudia just barged into had been our little sanctuary. The place I'd held my wife through chemo, steam soothing her when nothing else could. Now it was just another crime scene in Claudia's quest for control. I shoved the board out into the hallway, forced them step by step until the front door slammed behind them. By then, neighbors had started peeking from their porches, eyes wide, whispering names and stories they'd been too scared to say out loud until now. My wife, wrapped in a towel, said it clear as day. If you don't take this public, they'll bury it. She was right. If I didn't stand up, Claudia would make an example of us for every scared family on our street. So the next morning, I marched into their so-called throne room. The clubhouse, all polished oak and brass nameplates, the air thick with stale coffee and the stink of overconfidence. Claudia sat at the head, board flanking her like loyal knights, violation slips stacked like ammo. You've crossed a line, I told her. Calm, measured, because if I lost my temper, she'd win. Entering my home without consent is trespassing, not enforcement. And you know it. She tried to bluff, blabbering about water waste and community responsibility, but I laid down a copy of state property law, highlighted, underlined, no wiggle room. No HOA, no manager, no president could enter a private home except in emergencies. That silence after? Heavier than the steam in my bathroom the night before. I saw cracks in her armor then, tiny fissures widening as neighbors filtered in, curious and, maybe for the first time, quietly rooting for me. And that's when Terrell Gaines, the maintenance guy, became more than a background player. He just stood by the door, tool belt sagging, face full of guilt. He didn't say a word, but I could read the battle raging in his eyes, caught between orders and what was right. Claudia kept posturing, but she didn't own the room anymore. The battle had become public, and suddenly, it was about more than just my wife's privacy. It was about the board thinking they were above the law, fining families for 5-minute showers while their precious fountain at the entrance wasted thousands of gallons a week. You ever see hypocrisy so bold it's almost impressive? That was Claudia's fountain, a monument to arrogance, leaking and groaning, while she handed out fines for imaginary violations. After Claudia tried slapping a scarlet letter notice on my door, $1, $500 for excessive water use, due in 10 days, I decided to make my move. Instead of tearing it down, I left it up for every neighbor to see. Then I grabbed my keys and went straight to the fountain. You could hear the pump wheezing, see the water gushing out through cracks, and with a couple of photos, a flow gauge, and some notes, I had all the proof I needed. My wife watched me work, anger simmering just beneath the surface. She's trying to break us in public, she said. And she was right. This wasn't about water anymore. This was about humiliation, about Claudia flexing her muscle in front of everyone. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with chlorine on my hands and evidence on my phone, I realized how deep this went. If Claudia wanted to turn the neighborhood against me, fine. But I was about to show everyone where the real problem lay, and it wasn't a couple of long showers. I drove into Richmond the next morning, marched into the Department of Environmental Quality, and laid out the whole thing for an inspector named Harlan. Years of engineering taught me details matter, so I spelled it out: flow rates, leaks, wasted gallons, even a video of the fountain bleeding water like an open wound. Harlan listened, nodding, then said, "If this checks out, the board's in real trouble." That was all I needed. Driving back, I passed Claudia barking orders at the clubhouse, eyes narrow, smirk gone. The neighbors watched from their yards, the tension thick in the air. Something was shifting, you could feel it. People who'd been scared were starting to hope. That night, I sat on the porch with my wife, sunset stretching long shadows across the street. She asked, "You really think the state will move on it?" "They don't ignore violations like this," I told her. Claudia is about to learn she's not above the law. But the real twist came when Terrell showed up at my door. Hat low, voice trembling, sweat beading on his forehead. "She told me to do it," he confessed. "Claudia, the master key, the fake reports. If I didn't obey, she'd fire me, blacklist me." He looked me dead in the eye, shame all over his face. I kept the real maintenance logs. Copies. Water usage, contractor's notes. She's been hiding violations for years. My wife, ever the rock, told him straight. "That's not just negligence, Terrell. That's fraud." He nodded, exhausted, relieved to finally tell someone. "Just promise you'll protect my name. I can't let my kids pay for this." I promised. We'd do it the right way. The next morning, I headed to my old engineering office, ran the numbers, double-checked Terrell's logs against my photos. It was all there. Years of leaks, ignored warnings, doctored reports. With a file thick as a novel, I returned home to find another threat on my door, this time about liens on the house. Claudia was running scared, and when bullies get scared, they get sloppy. At the community park that Saturday, I opened the binder on a bench for anyone who cared to look. People crowded around, moms, dads, retirees who'd kept their heads down for years. "Is this real?" someone whispered. "As real as those fines on your doors," I said, voice steady, no grandstanding. The story spread fast. By the time Claudia stormed over, her loyalists in tow, the crowd was a storm. She tried to shut me down, but then Terrell stepped out of the shadows, tool belt slung low, face drawn but determined. "They're not falsified." Claudia told me to lie. She said the fountain had to stay perfect. Claudia turned on him, voice shrill, but he stood his ground. "Not worth my job. Not worth breaking people's trust." The park erupted, not just with gossip, but with outrage. Claudia's mask was off, her control slipping. I left the crowd to its murmurs, knowing the tide had finally turned. The state inspector called. He'd be visiting soon. I spent the night in the library with my wife, organizing everything, every statute, every testimony, every photo. Terrell texted me, "I'll testify." That was the nail in Claudia's coffin. At the next board meeting, the room was packed. Claudia opened with her usual bravado, but her voice couldn't cut through the crowd anymore. I laid out the evidence, page by page, photos, logs, contractor reports, Terrell's signed statement. Terrell stood beside me, hands trembling but voice clear. I logged those numbers. I was ordered to change them. The neighbors exploded, fines waved in the air, accusations flying. Claudia barked about community values, but the words were empty. The board was done. 2 days later, Harlan from the state showed up, clipboard in hand. He examined the fountain, checked the logs, listened to Terrell's testimony. "This fountain is in violation," he said, voice carrying over the crowd. "Fines will be issued. Orders will be filed." Claudia tried to protest, but Harlan just stared her down. Further denial will only escalate consequences. The board members beside her wilted, one muttering, "We need to resign." Just like that, Claudia's empire collapsed. A special election was called. For the first time in years, neighbors filled the clubhouse, not in fear, but in hope. Terrell stayed on, his honesty now his shield. The fountain was shut down until repairs could be made, a new symbol, not of power, but of accountability. I stood with my wife, her hand in mine, and for the first time, the roundabout felt clean, not oppressive. What started as a violation ended as a victory, not just for us, but for every family who'd been living under Claudia's shadow. And you know what? None of it would have happened if we'd stayed quiet. Sometimes all it takes is one person to say enough, to remind a community that power doesn't belong to the bully with the clipboard. It belongs to the people with the guts to fight back. So if you've ever stared down an HOA tyrant, or just want to see justice win for once, hit subscribe. Tell me your story in the comments, because this fight isn't over, and I want to hear what you think. Where does the line get drawn between order and overreach? And when is it finally time to push back?